I never imagined my own parents would one day look me in the eye and tell me my children weren't welcome in their home. Yet there I was standing in my kitchen staring at my phone in disbelief. Thanksgiving was just a few weeks away, and my mother's voice was unusually light as she spoke. "Honey, we need to talk about Thanksgiving this year." For a brief moment, warmth spread through my chest. For all the tension that had existed between us over the years, I still longed for these family traditions. My kids, Madison and Ethan, adored their grandparents despite the distance that had formed between us. "Of course, Mom. What's the plan?" I asked, already picturing the familiar scent of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and the warmth of family gathering around the table. There was a pause, just long enough to send a chill down my spine. "Well," she continued, clearing her throat, "this year we're doing things a little differently. It's going to be a smaller dinner. Just adults, something more intimate." I frowned. "Oh, so no kids at all?" Another pause. Longer this time. Then more hesitantly, "Well, no, not exactly." A cold knot twisted in my stomach. "What do you mean?" My mother sighed, as if she were the one being put in an uncomfortable position. "Lauren, we love your kids, we really do, but they're a bit, energetic. And honestly, we just feel like it would be better if you left them with a sitter this year." I gripped the edge of the counter. "So just my kids?" I forced out. "What about Brandon's?" "Brandon, my older brother. The golden child. The one who could do no wrong even when he did." The silence on the other end of the line was all the confirmation I needed. "Brandon and Megan are coming with their boys," she admitted, her voice softer now, as if that would make it sting any less. "But you know how well behaved they are, Lauren. They're just quieter, more refined. It's easier to have them at the table." A wave of heat flushed through me. I felt like I had been slapped. Like the ground beneath me had suddenly vanished. "They're just children," I said, my voice tight. "Madison is 7, Ethan is 4. Of course they have energy. But they're sweet, and they love you." "We're just trying to have a peaceful evening," my mother replied, her tone clipped now, irritated that I wasn't just accepting this. "It's not personal, Lauren. Not personal." I clenched my jaw, swallowing back the sharp words fighting to spill out. It wasn't just about Thanksgiving. It was the way they had always treated my children like an afterthought, while putting Brandon's boys on a pedestal. The way they showed up at their school plays but never came to Madison's dance recitals. The way Christmas gifts were always just a little extra for Brandon's kids. And now they weren't even hiding it. "I can't believe this," I whispered. "You're actually telling me that my kids aren't welcome but Brandon's are?" "Oh, Lauren, don't be dramatic," my mother sighed, exasperated now. "It's just one dinner. You and Ryan are still invited, of course." I almost laughed at the absurdity. They wanted me there, but not the two little humans I loved more than anything in this world. I swallowed hard. "No, Mom," I said firmly. "If my kids aren't welcome, then neither am I." Silence. A long, heavy silence. Then my mother exhaled sharply, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "Suit yourself." And just like that, she hung up. I stood there, staring at the phone, my breath unsteady. In the next room, I could hear my kids giggling, their laughter filling the house as they built a pillow fort, completely oblivious to the fact that their grandparents, the ones they adored, had just cast them aside like an inconvenience. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. I had spent my whole life trying to please my parents, trying to earn their approval. But at what cost? If I let them get away with this, if I went to that dinner while my children sat at home, wondering why they weren't good enough, what kind of mother would that make me? No, I wasn't doing this anymore. They had made their choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. And they would regret it sooner than they thought. The weight of my mother's words lingered long after the call ended. I stood in my kitchen, the quiet hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. My phone was still clutched in my hand, my fingers trembling as I set it down. My heart pounded, a mixture of anger and sadness swirling inside me. I had always known my parents favored Brandon, but I had convinced myself it wasn't as bad as it seemed. That deep down they loved all of us equally. But tonight they had ripped away any illusion of fairness. They didn't even try to hide it anymore. They loved his children more. A sudden laugh, pure and carefree, echoed from the living room. I turned to see Madison and Ethan, still tangled in their pillow fort, their faces flushed with excitement. completely unaware of the rejection that had just taken place. My chest tightened. I had spent my entire life trying to belong in a family that had never truly made room for me. But my children, they would never feel that kind of loneliness. I would make damn sure of it. I inhaled deeply, squaring my shoulders. Thanksgiving would still happen. There would still be turkey and cinnamon and warmth. But not in their house. And not with them. I was done chasing acceptance. This year I was going to create something better for my children and for myself. They deserved better. I took a slow breath, forcing my shoulders to relax as I walked into the living room, pasting a smile onto my face. "All right, you two," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Who's ready for movie night?" Ethan's little face lit up instantly. "Can we watch the one with the talking dog?" I scooped him up, pressing a kiss to the top of his soft curls. "Of course, buddy." Madison snuggled into my side, and as the three of us curled up on the couch, I tried to let the warmth of their laughter soothe the fire burning inside me. But it didn't. The anger sat heavy in my chest, refusing to settle. I had spent years trying to fit into my parents' world, playing by their rules, hoping that if I just did everything right, if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself over and over, they would finally see me as equal to Brandon. But it had never been enough. And I was done trying. The next morning my phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. "Brandon, Linda said you're being difficult about Thanksgiving. Why do you always have to make everything so dramatic?" I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. Of course she had already run to him. "Me, oh, so she told you she uninvited my kids but invited yours?" The typing bubbles appeared, then stopped. A minute passed before he finally responded. "Brandon, she just wants a calm dinner, Lauren. You know how your kids can be a lot. Like they were a burden. Like they were something to be tolerated, not loved." Something inside me snapped. "Me? Enjoy your perfect Thanksgiving, Brandon. I won't be there." I turned off my phone before he could respond. If they didn't want me or my children at their table, fine. I wouldn't be part of their world at all. And they were about to find out what that really meant. For years I had been the reliable one. When my parents needed groceries, they called me. When their Wi-Fi went down, I was the one who drove over to fix it. When they wanted help planning their holiday parties, I was the one stuck making calls and running errands. And Brandon? He got to be the golden child. The favorite. Doing the bare minimum while reaping all the rewards. But if I wasn't part of their preferred family, then they weren't going to benefit from me anymore. A week before Thanksgiving, my mother called again. I debated ignoring it, but I finally answered. "Hello, Lauren." Her voice was cautious, almost careful. "I just wanted to check in. I know you were upset, but I really hope you'll reconsider. We would love to have you and Ryan there. Not you and the kids, just you and Ryan." I closed my eyes, forcing myself to stay calm. "I meant what I said, Linda," I replied, my tone firm. "If my kids aren't welcome, neither am I." She let out a long sigh, as if I were exhausting her. "I just don't understand why you're being so stubborn. It's just one night. You know how much Brandon's boys mean to us." And there it was. The final brutal confirmation that my children, my entire world, would never be enough for her. I clenched my jaw, my hands tightening into fists. "You've made it clear where we stand, Linda," I said coldly. "I won't bother you again." "Lauren, don't be like this." Click. I ended the call. And this time, I didn't cry. I started small. When my father called that weekend to ask for help setting up his new TV, I let it go to voicemail. When Linda texted me asking if I could pick up her prescription, I left it unread. For years I had been at their beck and call. Always available. Always reliable. But not anymore. And it didn't take long for them to notice. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, I had ignored 12 calls. 6 unread texts. Then, that morning, another message from Brandon. "Brandon, Linda and Thomas are really upset that you're ignoring them. Are you seriously going to let this go this far?" I exhaled, shaking my head. Me. It already went too far when they told me my kids weren't welcome. This time he didn't reply. Good. I put my phone on silent and turned back to my real family. Madison and Ethan were at the table, helping Ryan mix pancake batter. Flour dusted their clothes, their cheeks. They were laughing, their giggles filling the kitchen like music. This was our Thanksgiving. No tension. No forced smiles. No expectations I would never meet. Just peace. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. But little did I know my parents weren't done yet. And their next move would be something I'd never forgive. Thanksgiving morning was perfect. No rushing to dress the kids in uncomfortable outfits. No stress over making the perfect side dish. No anxious glances at the clock, making sure we weren't late. Just us. The house smelled of pancakes and warm maple syrup. Madison and Ethan took turns stirring the batter, giggling every time Ryan almost flipped a pancake onto the floor. For the first time in a long time I felt free. And then my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Linda. I let it go to voicemail. This time, she could wait. A minute later my phone rang again. And then again. Ryan glanced up from where he was setting the table, concern flickering across his face. Want me to turn it off? I hesitated, fingers tightening around the phone. No. If it's an emergency, I should at least know. I swiped to answer, keeping my voice cold and steady. What is it, Linda? Oh, now you pick up, she huffed, her tone dripping with irritation. I suppose you're just sitting at home feeling sorry for yourself while we're all here having a lovely dinner. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Linda, if you called to gloat, I really don't have time. That's not why I called. Her voice sharpened. I need to ask you something. I pinched the bridge of my nose. What now? Did you cancel the credit card? My body went still. The air in the room shifted. I turned away from Ryan, lowering my voice. What are you talking about? Your father's credit card, the one we've been using for groceries, gas, essential things. It was declined this morning. A slow, icy realization crept up my spine. She wasn't talking about their credit card. She was talking about mine. Years ago, when my father had been recovering from surgery and their finances were tight, I had added them as authorized users on my account. It was supposed to be temporary, just to help them through a rough patch. I had meant to remove them when they got back on their feet. But life got busy, and they had never reminded me. I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening on the phone. You mean my credit card? A pause. Then Linda scoffed. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Lauren. It's just a card. You make good money and we figured. You figured what? My voice shook now, my pulse hammering in my ears. That you just keep using my money? That I wouldn't notice. Linda let out a sharp, impatient sigh. Oh, don't act like this is some big betrayal. We raised you. The least you could do is support us now. I inhaled sharply, my free hand balling into a fist. Are you serious? After telling me my kids weren't good enough to come to Thanksgiving, you still expected me to keep paying for your groceries? Are you even hearing yourself? Lauren, you're overreacting. That word again. Overreacting. I had spent years swallowing my pride, accepting their dismissiveness, letting their favoritism slide. But this was theft. And they didn't even have the decency to be ashamed. I forced my voice into something eerily calm. You're right about one thing, Linda. I did cancel the card. And since we're having honest conversations now, let me make something very clear. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. You won't see another cent from me. Ever. A sharp inhale on the other end. Then an incredulous gasp. Lauren, don't be ridiculous. And while we're at it, I continued, my voice never wavering. Don't expect Christmas gifts. Or birthday gifts. Or anything else either. You made your choice when you told me my kids weren't welcome. Now I'm making mine. A beat of silence. Then her voice dropped into something colder, sharper. You'll regret this. And then she hung up. For a moment I just stood there, gripping the phone so tightly my fingers ached. Then slowly I turned back toward the kitchen. Ryan was watching me carefully, his expression unreadable. Everything okay? I forced a small smile, my voice steadier than I felt. Yeah, just taking out the trash. He didn't ask any more questions. We spent the rest of the day wrapped in the warmth of our Thanksgiving. Watching movies, baking cookies, playing board games. For the first time in years there was no stress. No walking on eggshells. No pressure to prove myself to people who had already decided I wasn't enough. But as peaceful as it was, something in my gut told me this wasn't over. And I was right. Because my parents weren't just going to let their golden source of money walk away. Their next move would prove exactly what kind of people they really were. The silence didn't last long. 3 days after Thanksgiving, my phone lit up with an incoming call. Brandon. I stared at the screen, debating whether I even wanted to deal with this. But curiosity won. I exhaled sharply and answered. What do you want? What the hell, Lauren? He snapped, skipping pleasantries altogether. Linda just called me in tears, saying you cut them off. What is wrong with you? I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers to my temple. Did she also tell you that they've been using my credit card for years without my knowledge? Silence. Then a hesitant pause. Well, she said you were helping them out. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Helping them out? I could feel the fury rising again. A slow, searing burn in my chest. Brandon, they've racked up thousands of dollars on my account. Without asking. While treating my kids like garbage. But sure, let's act like I'm the bad guy here. Another long pause. Then his voice softened like he was trying to play mediator. Look, you know how they are. They didn't mean any harm. Mom she doesn't always think before she speaks. I let out a bitter laugh. Brandon, she called me and said I'd regret this. And you think she didn't mean harm? He sighed, but I had already made my decision. You want to keep enabling them? Fine. You do it. But I'm done. Lauren, click. I ended the call. And this time, I really was done. No more excuses. No more second chances. No more hoping they'd someday treat me or my kids like we mattered. I was free. And they? They had lost the only person who ever truly cared, he sighed, clearly struggling to keep his frustration in check. Look, I get that you're mad, but cutting them off completely? That's extreme. I let out a sharp laugh void of humor. Oh, you mean like how they completely excluded my kids from Thanksgiving? That kind of extreme. They just wanted a peaceful evening, Lauren. You know how your kids can be. A lot. My grip on the phone tightened. Oh, I see. So they can use my money, but my kids aren't good enough for their table? Got it. He groaned. You're twisting this. No, Brandon. My voice was like steel. I'm finally seeing it for what it is. There was a long pause. Then his tone shifted, calculating. Look, maybe we can work something out. What if you just kept helping them but set limits? Like a smaller monthly transfer? That way, no one has to suffer over a misunderstanding. A bitter laugh bubbled up in my throat. Let me get this straight. You want me to keep sending them money after they literally told me they love your kids more than mine? They didn't mean it like that, he muttered. They said it, Brandon. Silence. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head, scrambling for another excuse. Then his voice stiffened. Fine. If you want to be selfish, that's on you. But don't expect Linda and Thomas to forgive you anytime soon. I smirked, shaking my head. I'll survive. Before he could argue, I hung up. For the next few weeks, my parents played the silent treatment game. No calls. No texts. I figured they were hoping I'd cave, hoping I'd come crawling back, desperate for their approval like I always had. But what they didn't realize was that, for the first time in my life, I didn't need it anymore. And just when I thought they'd finally given up, they pulled one last desperate stunt. It was the week before Christmas when the letter arrived. Ryan found it in the mailbox, brow furrowing as he read the sender's name. It's from your parents. I stiffened, an icy dread settling in my stomach. Oh great. Let me guess. Guilt, manipulation, or straight-up gaslighting? He smirked, handing it to me. Why don't we find out? I tore open the envelope, expecting some dramatic plea. Instead, I found a formal legal document. My breath caught as I scanned the words. They were demanding reimbursement for years of emotional and financial support. I let out a disbelieving laugh. You have got to be kidding me. Ryan took the letter from my hands, his expression darkening as he read. They're saying you owe them for raising you, for all the financial sacrifices they made for your well-being. He looked up, jaw tightening. Are they actually trying to bill you for your own childhood? Apparently they were. They had even included an itemized breakdown: food, clothes, school supplies, medical expenses, stretching all the way back to when I was 5 years old. And at the bottom, a final sum. $78,542. I blinked, staring at the absurd number. They seriously think I'm going to give them nearly 80 grand? Ryan scoffed, tossing the letter onto the table. They must be desperate. I exhaled slowly, fury simmering beneath my skin. This wasn't about money. This was about control. A final desperate attempt to pull me back into their grip. I met Ryan's gaze, my decision already made. I think it's time I pay them a little visit. The next day, I drove to my parents' house, the letter gripped tightly in my hands. I knocked, and when Linda opened the door, her face immediately hardened. Oh, so now you show up. I didn't rise to the bait. Instead, I held up the letter. You seriously thought this would work? She folded her arms. It's what's fair. I let out a sharp laugh. Fair? You want to charge me for being your child while expecting me to bankroll you for the rest of your lives? Explain that logic. To me. Thomas appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, his expression smug. We sacrificed a lot for you, Lauren. And now you're abandoning us. I stared at them, shaking my head in pure disbelief. No, Thomas. My voice was steady, unyielding. You abandoned me. When you made it clear that my kids weren't good enough. When you lied and stole from me. When you put a price tag on my worth. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. Then in a clipped tone she said, if you don't want to pay, then I guess we'll have to involve lawyers. I tilted my head, unimpressed. Go ahead. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty. What? I crossed my arms. Take me to court. Try to explain to a judge why you're suing your own daughter for expenses from 20 years ago. Let's see how that plays out. Silence. For the first time they looked unsure. Thomas cleared his throat, his confidence faltering. We just thought you'd want to make things right. I laughed. Oh, I am making things right. Right now. And with that I ripped the letter in half. Linda gasped like I had just set the house on fire. You ungrateful little. I turned on my heel. Merry Christmas. I called over my shoulder, striding back to my car. And for the first time in my life I felt lighter. As I drove away, something clicked into place. They weren't upset about the money. They were angry because for the first time ever, I had all the power, and I wasn't giving it back. I thought that ripping up their ridiculous demand would finally make them back off. That maybe, just maybe, they'd sit in the wreckage of their own arrogance and realize they had pushed me too far. But people like them, they don't change. They just escalate. It started small. A text from Linda 2 days before Christmas. Linda. Lauren, this is ridiculous. We're family. You don't turn your back on family over a silly argument. I ignored it. The next day, another message. Linda, we forgive you. Come to Christmas dinner, and we'll forget this ever happened. I nearly choked on my coffee. They forgive me? Then, a few hours later, one from Brandon. Brandon. They're really hurting, Lauren. Just apologize so we can move on. I rolled my eyes. Of course, in his world, I was the one who had done something wrong. I typed out a response. Me funny. They weren't hurting when they were stealing from me. Or when they told me my kids weren't welcome. I think they'll survive. I hit send. Then I blocked his number. And that should have been the end of it. But on Christmas Eve, the doorbell rang. Ryan and I exchanged a look. No way, he muttered. I walked to the door and peered through the peephole. Sure enough, Linda and Thomas. The knock that changed everything. I thought about ignoring them. Let them stand in the cold. Let them feel what it's like to be shut out. But then I saw what they were holding. A giant, beautifully wrapped box. A grand gesture. A bribe dressed up in shiny paper. I exhaled sharply and pulled the door open. What do you want? Linda's face lit up with that familiar forced cheerfulness. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. She cooed, as if we hadn't spoken in weeks. As if she hadn't torn my children out of her perfect holiday plans. Thomas stepped forward, holding out the gift. For the kids. I folded my arms, unmoved. No thanks. Linda's smile faltered, her fingers tightening around the box. Lauren, don't be stubborn. Let's not ruin Christmas over this. A bitter laugh bubbled up in my throat. You already ruined Christmas, I shot back. When you told me my children weren't good enough for your table. Remember that. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Because there was no excuse. No way to spin it. Thomas sighed heavily, rubbing his forehead. Come on, Lauren. Let's just be a family again. Family. That word used to mean something to me. But now? Now I saw it for what it was. A leash they used to keep me in line. I stared at them, exhausted. You don't want to be a family. You want me to be useful. The silence between us stretched. And that told me everything I needed to know. I shook my head. Take your gift and go. Linda's face twisted. Lauren, don't be selfish. Think about the children. A slow, cold smile curled my lips. I am thinking about the children. That's exactly why you're not in their lives anymore. Thomas's jaw tightened. You really want to do this? I exhaled. I already did. And with that, I shut the door in their faces. A Christmas without regret that night. We had the best Christmas ever. Madison and Ethan tore into their presents, their laughter echoing through the house. We drank hot cocoa, played board games, and watched Christmas movies until they fell asleep on the couch. For the first time in years, I wasn't holding my breath, waiting for approval. I wasn't sitting at a table where my children were only tolerated. This was real family. Chosen family. The kind that doesn't come with conditions. I thought that was the end of it. That after being cut off financially, rejected at Christmas, and humiliated at my front door, my parents would finally understand that I was done. But I underestimated just how much control they thought they still had over me. Because on New Year's Eve, they did something I never saw coming. The knock that changed everything. Again, New Year's Eve was supposed to be a fresh start. I told myself that as I set up the snack table, the smell of homemade pizza filling the kitchen. Laughter and music echoed through the house. Madison and Ethan ran around in their little party hats, counting down the hours until midnight. Ryan poured us each a glass of champagne, his smile soft, warm. It was our night. Our celebration. And then the knock. I froze. My stomach twisted. Ryan met my gaze. You think? I already knew. I walked to the door, took a slow breath, and opened it. And there they were. Linda, Thomas, Brandon, and Brandon's wife Megan. An ambush. I crossed my arms. What do you want? Linda smiled, but it was the same sugary, fake tone she always used when she wanted something. We just want to talk. No thanks, I said flatly. Thomas sighed. His face lined with frustration. Lauren, enough. You've made your point. Now let's fix this before things go too far. My spine stiffened. Too far? What does that even mean? Linda exchanged a glance with Brandon before turning back to me, her voice dipping into something softer, something meant to manipulate. We just don't want this to affect the kids. Something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. I narrowed my eyes. What are you talking about? Brandon stepped forward, arms crossed over his chest, like he was the one who had been wronged. Linda and Thomas have been talking to a lawyer. A cold wave of dread rolled through me. I blinked. A lawyer. Linda nodded, her eyes gleaming with false sympathy. We're just worried, Lauren. For the first time since this all started, I felt it. Real fear. They weren't just here to talk. They were here to take something from me. And I wasn't about to let that happen. The final threat, you've cut your children off from their real family over a silly misunderstanding. That's not fair to them. Linda's words slithered into the air like a snake coiling for a strike. I felt my pulse pound hot and steady. What exactly are you trying to say? Thomas cleared his throat, his face impassive, but his eyes gave him away. We've been looking into grandparents' rights. For a moment, all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. Then suddenly I laughed. Not a polite chuckle. Not a quiet scoff. A real full-bodied laugh, loud, sharp, and utterly unhinged. They actually thought they could legally force their way back into my life? Into my kids' lives? Brandon's face twisted. What's so funny? I wiped at the corners of my eyes, shaking my head. Oh, you're serious? You really think a judge is going to hear this mess and side with you? Linda lifted her chin, her lips pressed into a thin, self-righteous line. We've done nothing wrong. Nothing wrong. I repeated, stepping forward, my voice dangerously calm. You stole from me. You used my money for years behind my back. You made it clear my kids weren't good enough for your precious little holiday gatherings. And now, because I finally cut you off, you think you can bully your way back in. Thomas's face darkened. You don't want to do this, Lauren. I met his glare head-on, my voice cold as steel. Oh, but I do. I pulled out my phone and held it up between us. I want you to think very carefully about your next move. The air crackled with tension. I have every text, every voicemail, and every entitled demand for my money saved. And I promise you if you take this to court, I will bury you. Megan let out a soft gasp. Lauren, come on. No. My eyes stayed locked on Linda and Thomas. You have no case. You know it. I know it. And if you keep pushing me, I will make sure everyone you know, your friends, your church, your precious little social circles, sees exactly who you really are. Silence. The kind that lingers, heavy and suffocating. Then Linda's face twisted in anger. You're being unreasonable. I smiled. No, Linda. I'm finally being smart. I stepped back into my house and grabbed the door. Happy New Year, I said sweetly. Then I slammed it in their faces. The aftermath, they never went through with their pathetic legal threat. Of course they didn't. They knew they had nothing. They knew they had lost. The weeks that followed were blissfully quiet. Not a text. Not a call. Not a single manipulative plea disguised as concern. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I had never known before. Freedom. The weight of their expectations? Gone. The pressure to please them? Gone. The endless cycle of guilt and manipulation? Gone. And in the space they had occupied, something new took root. Peace. Months later, on a bright spring afternoon, I sat on the porch, a cold glass of lemonade in hand, watching Madison and Ethan chase bubbles across the yard. Their laughter rang through the air, light and unburdened. Ryan handed me his own glass and sat beside me, his arm resting lazily along the back of my chair. It's been quiet. I nodded, taking a slow sip. Yeah, feels good. He smirked, tilting his head toward me. Think they'll ever try again? I watched my children, the pure joy on their faces, the way the sun caught in Madison's curls, the way Ethan giggled every time he popped a bubble. I exhaled, feeling the weightless certainty settle deep in my bones. Doesn't matter, because I had already won. I had my kids, my real family, and I would never let anyone make them feel unwanted again.